Hey class, how are you? This is Steve again. Tonight we're going to look at Chapter 5, which deals with, again, the arguments for the existence of God, but instead of using logic and reason, which was last week's ontological, teleological, cosmological, atheistic standpoints, and also practical, or pragmatic, this week we're going to look at the effort of proving the existence of God through experience. Now, I'll tell you right off the bat, because just so you'll know where I'm coming from, I was really disappointed by this chapter. And the reason I was because the author is so biased that he would not even consider, in my opinion, experiences as being something real or valid. He seemed to continually put down any kind of experience, whether it's revelation or psychic experience or any of those that we're going to talk about. He seemed to put them down and basically argue that none of those things really mean anything. And I think that's a false premise. If you begin with the premise that there are no such things as miracles or revelation or psychic experiences, then you're never going to have one. So my point is, for those people who have had such experiences, these things are very real to them. And by being real, then does it prove the existence of God? I don't know. I mean, that's for you to decide. But I think to completely throw away the argument because you don't believe in these things is invalid by itself. But he's speaking like a philosopher, so I guess what can you expect? But I'm going to go through the major points that he talks about and try to give you a brief rundown on the way I see these things. And hopefully this will help a little bit with your quiz. I think you have a quiz on this chapter. I'll double check. But anyway, I hope you understand the material a little bit better. The first argument he deals with is what he calls revelation. Revelation is the expression of a deity, typically through writings or perhaps through verbal means. In other words, for example, the Bible is revelation from God. The Quran is supposed to be the revelation from Allah. So books, verbal types of things, they can all deal with revelation. And revelation is the experience you have when you read something that is written by or inspired by a deity, whether it's God or big G or God, little g. The point is this, that revelation by itself seeks to prove the existence of God because the content itself is supposed to be inspired. Well, his argument in his text is that that's a circular argument. And because it's a circular argument, it's one of the worst arguments you can have. Well, perhaps, but again, he doesn't offer to me another argument against revelation. I mean, if something is revealed by God or Allah, then who is to say that that's not a true revelation? So I may make some of you angry by these things that I say, but I want you to know where I stand on them and how I don't really hold to much of what he talks about in this particular chapter. The next one he talks about is a mystical experience. And let me find that here. The mystical experience deals with becoming, basically becoming one. As he says here, it's when the subject is transformed and reports the loss of individuality, the oneness of all reality, union with the deity, the unity of the subject of the experience with the object of the experience. So his argument here is that another way to prove the existence of God is through the mystical experience, where one becomes God-like. Now, to take it on the negative side, this would explain exorcisms, for example. Today in the United States, there are more exorcisms performed than perhaps ever before. And in an exorcism, what happens is the priest or whoever's leading that particular effort is trying to drive out a demon who possesses that person. So a mystical experience is when the person becomes one with the deity. And that's the best way to kind of look at it. Now, if you look at it from the other perspective, it's when, for example, in the Bible, the Apostle Paul talks about going to the third heaven where he sees a number of things. That's a mystical experience, an experience where he's unified with God. So, again, the author of this text argues that that's not a valid point either, because who's to say that he is in fact one with a God? But I think by looking at the exorcism standpoint, you begin to understand what this mystical experience means. It's a union with the deity. The next one he looks at, I'm sorry I'm flipping pages here, I've got stuff highlighted everywhere that I wanted to cover. The next one is religious experiences. And what he says here is an encounter with a supernatural being, be it a deity or an emissary or intermediary for the deity, nevertheless a spiritual entity. What this means is when people have experiences where they come into contact with a deity, God, a higher being, a supreme being, might be an angel. Back in the, I guess about 1990s or so, 80s, 90s, there was this huge movement about angels. Everyone had to have an angel. Angels were protecting you all the time, and you know, some of you still hold to that, and that's fine. But there was just this huge movement throughout society and culture that said that went angel crazy for a while. There were stores that sold nothing but angels. And I know this partly because my mom was into it, and my mom passed away a year ago, but she left at her house just innumerable angel figurines. So it was a big deal there for a while. But what this religious experience means is that you have an encounter with God. You have an encounter with an angel. You have an encounter with something greater than you yourself. So it's an experience, and it's termed a religious one because it's a religious deity or religious encounter of some kind. That makes sense? Okay. Most of this stuff you can read right through it and you'll know what it's talking about, but I just wanted to give you my 2 cents on it. The next one is a psychic phenomenon. Now, he says this deals with things like ghosts and spirits and souls. He goes on to say, he says that this relates to a non-physical realm of existence and the existence of spirits or souls of which the deity is a member, the supreme being, spirit, or soul. The type of psychic phenomena involved here would be those that would support the immortality of the soul and survival after death. They are the phenomena that provide support for the post-mortem survival hypothesis. So the argument here is psychic phenomenon, whether it's ghosts or apparitions or beings, whatever they might be, still exist. Therefore, there is a spiritual realm, and therefore, if there's a spiritual realm, then there can be a spiritual supreme being. That's basically the argument. I'll tell you a quick ghost story. The house we live in now is the house we'll probably die in. It's got everything we've wanted, and we're getting too old to move around or whatever. So we're in a house that we just absolutely love. But for several years, we lived in a home that was much smaller than this house, but it was very comfortable. It was very quaint. Um, but one room, and again, you may not believe this, and that's fine, but one room had particularly strange things happen to it, or in it. There would be strange noises. There would be um, stuff that would just suddenly fall. There was all kinds of weird things like that going on. You were sure you turned the light off, but the light's on again. Um, Things like that. Well, one night, I had a cold. I wasn't feeling very good. So I went and slept in that room while my wife slept in the other bedroom. So I'm back in that room and sleeping, and I wake up, and I know you're going to say this is the cold medicine or this is my imagination, but I woke up. I was awake as I am right now, and there was a man sitting on the edge of my bed, and I jumped back. I was laying down, but I had sat up and I jumped back, and then he was gone. So I don't know what that was. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't dreaming. It wasn't the cold medicine. I have to trust my senses, and there was something there. Um, the house was very strange, and I found out later that there were several incidences that happened um, within that home that makes it a little spooky. Um, for example, we found evidence where the locks on the doors were on the outside of the door, not on the inside, as though somebody was trying to keep someone in the room rather than letting them out of the room. There was a cat that was beheaded and the carcass thrown in our backyard. There's just weird stuff that happened like that. So I tell you all that to say, not to let you think that I've gone crazy here or anything like that, because I haven't. I mean, those were real experiences for us. But to say that psychic phenomena do happen. One other quick story. A good friend of mine who's passed away now, he was a longtime pastor of a Protestant church. And even though he believed in God, obviously, and preached about God and loved God very much, he for some reason didn't quite believe in demon possession and exorcisms and those kinds of things. So one day a priest friend of his asked him to come with him because he was performing an exorcism on someone. And my friend just kind of laughed and said, yeah, I'll go with you. I'll go see what this is all about. Expecting, somebody just making a bunch of noises and all of that kind of thing. He said they walked into the room, and there was nothing in the room except a chair. And this man was sitting on the chair with his head down, not looking at the priest or my friend who came in. And my friend said that within seconds, the man flew out of his chair, slammed against the wall, and was knocked unconscious. Now, we're not talking about 2 feet. We're talking about probably 10, 12 feet. He was thrown in the air, slammed against the wall, and became unconscious. Now, I asked my friend, I said, what happened then? And he said, well, I began to believe in the devil then too. So, a couple little stories just to try to make this a little bit more real for you. But psychic phenomena deals with ghosts. Some people say you can't be a Christian and believe in ghosts. The only thing I would say to that is even King Saul believed in spiritists, and believed in witchcraft because he called up a witch to help him in his battles. Some other odd things like that. But so let's skip on to that. That's enough ghost stories for tonight, I guess. Miracles is the next one. And miracles are those supernatural events, things that defy the physical order and become something that could not have happened. For example, in the Bible, it talks about the Red Sea, R-E-D, Red Sea being parted. And when it was parted, the people of Israel, the Hebrews, were allowed to cross over. And as they crossed over on dry land, the Egyptians began to follow after them. And the water closed around them, around the Egyptians, yet all of the Hebrew people made it across. Okay, you may or may not believe in that story. But listen to what this fellow says. This is on page, well, I can't tell what page this is. That's the only bad thing about the way this book is laid out. But listen to what one person asks us to believe rather than believe that story. He says, of course, the most dramatic event recorded in Exodus is the parting of the Red Sea, R-E-D, remember that. A scene immortalized by Cecil B. DeMille. But while revealing ancient carvings and hieroglyphics that he argues support the Old Testament account, a guy named Jacobovici, and I don't know who that is. Jacobovici again offers a scientific explanation. Now listen to this explanation and ask me which one is harder to believe. He suggests that the biblical reference to the Red Sea is actually a mistranslation of an ancient Hebrew word which meant reed, R-E-E-D-C, reed sea. Okay, that's so far, maybe. Then he goes on to say, which is now a dried body of water. Now this is where it gets bizarre. He hypothesizes that the seismic activity caused by the earthquake may have temporarily raised a land bridge for safe passage, and the pursuing Egyptians were the unfortunate victims of perfectly timed tsunamis approaching from the Mediterranean. So, excuse me. So I'm supposed to be asked to believe that an earthquake came just at the time that the people of Israel were crossing the Red Sea. And just as the Egyptians came along, there was a perfectly timed tsunami that overtook them. I don't know about you, but for me, I would take the other story first. It's a little bit hard for me to believe that I'm expected to believe that to happen over what happens or what's described in the Bible. But again, I told you at the beginning of this semester that my job is not to proselytize you. I'm not trying to convert you into anything. I have my belief system and I know what I believe. What I'm trying to do is expose you to different thoughts, different ideas, different ways people see religion and how they believe in religion. But I will say that this chapter was very disappointing for me, simply because the author was not objective. He was very subjective in his writing, basically saying that none of these things could have happened. No such thing as miracles or psychic phenomenon or religious experiences. None of that is real. So for me, that was quite disappointing. But anyway, please read through the chapter, and hopefully this little blurb with my ghost stories helped a little bit. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you next time. Bye.